But speaking of the 90s, we're going to continue on with our wrestling one. We were supposed to do this a couple weeks ago, but we had some changes. Favorite Bret Hart moment. I'm going to go first. Of course, I'm going to say WrestleMania 13. Him and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Legendary match, because I do think that definitely helped Steve Austin as far as with his career. That was also the match in which Bret Hart turned heel. Stone Cold talked about how great that match was. Bret Hart, the same thing. To your point, champ, it did. That was probably the beginning of the Attitude Era. And just how great the match was because of how historic Bret was as a technician. And Steve, before the neck injury, he was a very underrated technician. I don't think Steve has gotten enough credit for his in-the-ring skills and ability. So that match, but also him in WrestleMania against Russ's Soul, Owen Hart. And then after that, he later faced Yokozuna in the main event and then won the title. That was another great one from Bret the Hitman Hart. Bret, I mean, great champion, took the wrestling business seriously. Obviously the royalty, his father, Stu Hart. He takes wrestling to heart. It was just great. Just watching the documentaries on him. In my opinion, the greatest technician in the ring. Even though BRF, you've made the argument for Owen Hart, Bret Hart right there. Bret Hart, you can't go wrong with Bret Hart. I don't know too many people in the ring that can do it better than him. And another great moment from Bret Hart, I would have to say. Another great moment from Bret the Hitman Hart was probably just him being the hero, because a lot of guys, a lot of people, they grew up idolizing Bret Hart, the figures, the glasses that he wore. Again, from the country of Canada, he's a Canadian hero. He is revered. So a lot of great things. And another great match from Bret the Hitman Hart. Let's not forget the Iron Man match, WrestleMania 12, between he and the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. That was one hell of a match, man, for over an hour. And to have those two talents in the ring, in Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, whew, that was fun to watch. But BRF, I'm gonna let you go. What's your favorite Bret Hart moment?
I'll be honest. Even though he had a lot of he had like a lot of tremendous matches. I mean, you brought up the Iron Man match from WrestleMania 12. I mean, of course, him and Stone Cold WrestleMania 13. I mean, that pretty much like that was pretty much like the barometer for what the Attitude Era was about to be. I mean, and even though people talk about the Montreal Screwjob, the match before was fire before that happened. Like, they were tearing the house down before that moment happened. But if I had to pick one as my all-time favorite Bret Hart moment, it was when he came back. It was that Monday Night Raw when he came back. I mean, just the anticipation, you're waiting on it, and then Justin Roberts gets on, starts the show, and does the announcement, just like for the first time in like 14 years, and you're like, oh my God, this is really about to happen. And then he walks out, and the ovation he gets, and it's just like, see, it's like, it's one of those where it's like, man, I hated everything transpired the way it did, but Bret Hart should have never left. Like, the fact, it's like he should have never. That situation really should have never happened, and it's a shame that it happened the way it did. And then for him to reconcile with Shawn Michaels like that too, and it was just like, it was like a fitting kind of. It was that full circle moment, that I feel like not only the WWE needed, but fans of wrestling as a whole needed to see that. And just from there to be able to kind of, even, what he could still do, even though his body was limited, just kind of, just kind of like that, you know, that match with the Miz where he won the United States Championship, seeing him put the Miz in the sharpshooter, it was kind of like giving fans a little taste of like, okay, this is what Homeboy used to do back in the day. If you never saw Bret Hitman Hart, the man was like a surgeon in the ring like, especially when it came to like his submissions, particularly that sharpshooter, which is one of the greatest submissions in the history of pro wrestling. Like, just it kind of filled me up as a wrestler fan seeing Bret Hart come back out there, because like I mean, like, how could you not smile seeing him under the WWE banner again? How can you not smile at that? Because I feel like if anybody was the epitome of what the WWE was for any amount of time, it was Bret the Hitman Hart, particularly around like that new generation era when him and Shawn Michaels were basically like the flag bearers of the new generation era. So I was very happy to see him come back. And the reason why I say that's my all-time favorite Bret Hart moment was just simply because it gave it gave us the closure we needed as far as his career and the WWE, knowing he wasn't gonna do too much more, but just kind of seeing them you know kind of seeing him and Sean make things right. And then even though we got that match against even though that WrestleMania 26 match where we knew what it was going to be, we knew it wasn't going to be good, but it's the fact it was like, man, we got Bret Hart back under W banner, man. You can't there's no way you can't smile at that. So him coming back in Night Raw, and yeah, that was what 2011. Him coming back is my all time favorite moment.
Champ.
Oh man, Bret Hart. Played with Bret Hart on WWF Warzone and In Your House and WrestleMania the arcade version. So memorable. But I don't think this has said a lot about Bret Hart. Remember, he was in I think he's the only wrestler that was in 4 pivotal eras. He was in the golden era in the 80s. He was in the new generation era in the 90s. And he was in the attitude era. And then those were arguably the 3 greatest eras in wrestling: the golden era, the new generation era, and the attitude era. So for him to be part of all of those and be relevant in each one of them is nothing short of amazing. I think people kind of sell him short because of a lot of the interviews, a lot of the shoot interviews that he does nowadays. And I think that sometimes people act like, life imitating art, because remember, the reason why he turned heel is because, a lot of the promos that he was doing was saying how he got, messed over by the WWE. And it's quite ironic that now people are seeing him in a certain light with some of the interviews that he do about Goldberg, Triple H, just to name a few. And you're seeing some of that. Is it life imitating art or art imitating life? We don't know. But I digress. Favorite Bret Hart moment got to be the Iron Man match. 1 solid hour. 1 solid hour. And although he was on the receiving end of a loss on that one, you just cannot wrestle a better match than that. You cannot wrestle a better match than that. Another match that is really not talked about is the dedication match that he had for his brother when he was in WCW, the night after he passed away at Over the Edge, with a certain wrestler. We know we can't say his name, but if you know wrestling and you know who he was close to, he was a real close friend of the Hart family. Mm-hmm. So for him to wrestle him the night after his brother unfortunately passed away on a Monday Night Raw, and it was a hell of a match, by the way, was nothing short of amazing, because that was a great dedication match. Last but not least, I will have to say, I will have to say, hmm, him winning his first title from Ric Flair.
That's a great one.
Him winning his
1992.
yes. For you to go over a Ric Flair back then is nothing short of amazing. Because that is when, in my humble opinion, the new generation really began. Now you still had your Hulk Hogan's and everybody who was the stalemate of the golden era on top. But I think that moment right there signified, okay, this guy is not a gigantic type of guy like a Hulk Hogan, like a warlord, like the Ultimate Warrior. This guy is one of the athletic undercards that goes out and have sellout matches every single night with the Intercontinental title, and he's going out there and he's beating a Ric Flair and going over on a Ric Flair in '92 during arguably the peak of era as far as Ric Flair is concerned. So for him to go over on Ric Flair, that was definitely one hell of a moment. And people don't talk about this as much. He was the very first guy to pin the Roddy Piper shoulder to the mat. He was one of the first and only guys to ever do that. Because remember, Roddy Piper had a rule. My shoulders are not going to that mat. And for him to be in the sleeper, for him to flip himself off the ropes and be able to pin Roddy Piper for that Intercontinental title at I think it was WrestleMania 6, that was nothing short of amazing. Because for Piper to say, I'm going to let you go over on me and pin my shoulders to the mat, which not even the Golden Goose himself, Hulk Hogan, could do back in those days, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm. I think another great moment from Bret the Hitman Hart. I mean, the promos. I mean, Bret, even though you may not like his mic skills and stuff, but he and Sean, before the Montreal screw job, they had some interesting promos. And a lot of the stuff, even though it was from a storyline, it was real personal. But man, them two them going back and forth back in those days, I mean, that was entertaining. Remember, from Jerry the King Lawler, a champ, he had some type of sign, personal issues, draw money.
Mm-hmm.
And Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels knew how to do that. I think the other knock on, I think the other problem with Bret champ, how the way he was utilized in WCW, and you've brought it up constantly, how he never had a chance to face Hulk Hogan in WCW.
No,
That's a travesty.
that is a travesty. I mean, for him to not be able to face Hulk Hogan at his peak, Sting at his peak, a lot of other guys at their peak, and be pretty much on the undercard with a lot of other guys who, he was able to put on good matches. But he had a hell of a match with Booker T and Bash at the Beach. But, they didn't utilize him properly. I really believe that, and this is no knock to WCW because I love WCW. I will be the first one to tell you that I was a WCW fan until a certain point. But I really think they got Bret Hart just to spite Vince McMahon. I really don't think they had a legitimate plan. I really don't think they had I really think they just wanted to get Bret Hart to say, I got one more of your guys. Because for him to come right over, to be a special referee in the match, and it literally pretty much recreated the Montreal screw job, but in an offset type of way. And then for him 6 months later to be in the NWO, it's kind of weird.
Exactly.
And look, when we talk about families in wrestling history, that's the Hart family is one of those families that's going to go down in history. Because let's not forget about 1997 Canadian Stampede. You had the Hart family, the Hart Foundation, in the heart of Canada, Calgary, Alberta, Canada, versus Stone Cold, the Road Warriors, and Ken Shamrock. and the whole Hart family was in the ring, including, I mean, all of the all-time greats, including Stu, was involved in that match. Because remember, during that match, the great Stone Cold Steve Austin, somebody threw a drink on Stone Cold Steve Austin, and he grabbed Stu Hart. And they ended up throwing him back in the ring, and they rolled him over in a small package and beat him. And the whole Hart family was in that ring. That was essentially Bret Hart and his family's pay-per-view and their tribute. So if you want to point to any Hart moment, it's that. And the Hart family, man, one of the greatest families to ever live in wrestling. Not to mention they train. Shout out to Flash, man. He brought a lot of things to the light of who they train. Chris Jericho, Abdullah the Butcher.
That was shocking, though.
Yes. That shocked me because, considering how Abdullah the Butcher was, I'm like, I don't think of him as a Hart dungeon guy. You don't really think, but that just goes to show you things can be deceiving now. But for him to bring out all of those guys, not to mention the family itself, because hey, remember the first Survivor Series when they had the Hart family long before the Hart Foundation that started the Owen Hart and Bret Hart feud. You had all the Hart brothers versus Shawn Michaels and his Knights. So a lot of great moments, man. Big shout out to Bret Hart, man. I mean, he was a stalemate for the WWE when a lot of people had turned away from wrestling. People talk about the new generation, but they don't want to acknowledge that was a time where a lot of people wasn't watching wrestling at a certain point. And for you to draw fans during that time, it's nothing short of amazing because he was a draw. He drew a hell of a lot of money. So, and because people talk about the new generation, but let's just face it, the new generation era of wrestling is the lost generation of wrestling. Not many people were watching during that time. The stands were not full during that time. Let's just acknowledge that. They had their great characters in Razor Ramon, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, just to name a few. But at that point in wrestling, after the golden era, in the new generation era, wrestling hadn't lost its mojo for a good little while. On both sides, not just in WWE, but WCW as well. So for him to draw money during that time, and if you put Bret Hart on the card, it's going to sell out. That's nothing short of amazing because not everybody was watching during the new generation era.